This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. K-State Assistant State Climatologist Matt Sittel kicks off today's show with a winter weather summary. He shares insight on the diverse conditions across Kansas this winter and what we can potentially expect to see this spring and summer. We also tune into BCI's Cattle Chat podcast. Brad White, Bob Larson, and Brian Lubbers discuss a unique disease that oftentimes results in cattle that, simply put, ain't looking right. We follow that up with Kansas Profile with Ron Wilson. Today, Ron highlights Beachy's Flowers and Produce, a fully hydroponic operation that uses state-of-the-art greenhouses to grow flowers and produce for their consumers. K-State horticulturalist Ward Upham ends today's show by covering spring lawn care for cool season lawns. He shares information on mowing, applying a light fertilizer if you didn't fertilize in November, and a weed killer for broadleaf weeds such as dandelions. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by K-State Assistant State Climatologist Matt Sittel for a summary of our winter conditions we really experienced in the past several months and kind of what we can expect here this spring. So, Matt, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, today, like I said, we're going to start with a summary of winter conditions, and it was a little spotty across the state. We have a lot of diverse environments, and that was evident in what we saw this year.
That's true. Winter started out, we go back to meteorological winter, which we define as the 3 months of December, January, and February. December was a really dry month across the state. And then January and February, we got into a wetter pattern, but the pattern was not even for all of the parts of the state. We look at our summary statistics for that 3-month period. Southwest Kansas ended up having a drier than normal winter. All the other divisions of the state, and there's 9 total divisions in the state, were above normal. The areas that had the most precipitation were northeast and east central Kansas, but also surprisingly northwest Kansas. And the main reason for that is there was a lot of snow in northwest Kansas. Goodland has had almost 36 inches of snow for, we won't call it the winter because there is some snow in the fall. So let's say since September 1st. They've had 36 inches of snow. But if you live in northeast Kansas, Manhattan, we've had 3 inches of snow all winter. Topeka's had only 6 inches. And if we get no more snow, we'll rank in the top 10 least snowiest, call it falls and winters on record, which is funny because they were above normal precip. All of our precip pretty much fell as rain. The 2 or 3 really heavy precipitation events that we had, it was just a little too warm to snow. So we ended up getting a lot of rain out of it.
Well, that's not a bad thing for us here. And I know that, a lot of the other parts of the state that we hadn't mentioned weren't as well off as those that you just did. So the Southwest, they really struggled this winter.
They did, unfortunately, because the snow was primarily northwest, west central Kansas, and they just didn't get any precipitation. As we look at the year to date, so if we shift our view a little bit from January 1st to the current, Southwest Kansas has only had about 50% of their normal precipitation. Now, that sounds worse than it is because it's kind of dry in the first 3 months of the year. So the 50% of normal is really only about 9/10 of an inch of precip that they're below normal. But if we go back to 2022 and the deficits in western Kansas were on the 9 to 10 inch range, we're looking at a continuation. Southwest Kansas has had below normal precip for 17 consecutive months. And I think March is almost certainly going to be number 18. So it's crazy. A year and a half of below normal precipitation in that division.
Think about the compounding effects of those conditions. I mean, the western portion of our state, while, the Northwest had better conditions in the South, still kind of a long way to go to recover, per se.
Well, I think so, because you say, well, okay, you're 10 inches below normal from 2022. Well, how do you get that back? Do you get 10 inches of rain in one event? Well, that's not going to work because the ground is not going to be capable of absorbing 10 inches of rain. What we need is an extended period where we're getting moderate amounts of precip and we're just going to have repeated events. But I don't think that's realistic at this point because if we look at the longer-term outlooks for spring into summer, at best they're saying equal chances of above normal and below normal precipitation. Now, how much faith do we put in those forecasts? The main thing that they're looking at is ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. And you may have heard that we went from a triple dip La Nina where we had 3 consecutive winters to La Nina being declared officially over. So the forecasts say, well, we're going to potentially transition into El Nino, which is warmer than normal sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. If we do that, there is a historical tendency to have a little more precipitation than is normal in Kansas. But when we say a little bit above normal, we're only talking 1 to 2 inches more. So it's not a case where if it's El Nino, you're going to have a crazy wet spring and summer. It's a tendency more than it is an absolute.
While we're thinking about kind of those patterns playing out, we did see conditions improve, like we said, across parts of the state, especially when it comes to our drought monitor. That's something we've been closely following. So while conditions are still not great, 16% of the state is drought-free now at this point.
That's true, and that 16% is exclusively in northeast and east central Kansas, where late in winter, the rainfall events have just been focused on the eastern third of the state. Unfortunately, we're still at 36% of the state at D4, which is our most severe drought category. And that is almost 4 times greater than the state that has the second largest amount, which is our neighbor to the south, Oklahoma, where they have about 9% of the state at D4. And we really haven't seen any change to southwest Kansas in months now. That D4 has been pretty much locked in. And I would like to think it'll change eventually. I just don't see it in the short term, unfortunately.
Sure. And you mentioned, the switching to an El Nino pattern, not having drastic improvements there, but we're kind of in the in-between right now. You mentioned before we went on air here that there's kind of a neutral spot that can happen between La Nina and El Nino, and it seems we're kind of in that right now.
That's true. The classification for El Nino is very simple. It's based on how far above or below normal sea surface temperatures are. And the boundary, if you will, for El Nino is a half degree or greater above normal departure. Similarly, La Nina on the other side is less than minus 0.5. So it's a narrow band, if you will. When you're considered neutral, you're not La Nina, you're not El Nino. Your sea surface temperatures are within half a degree of normal. And that's where we are right now. We're climbing out of that, those more negative numbers. And the Alex, as I say, favor El Nino, but we're talking only like a 60% chance of El Nino when we get into summertime. The remainder of that is favoring neutral conditions. So we'll see what happens. It's hard enough to forecast for the state of Kansas, but now trying to figure out sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific 6 months in advance, that's a lot harder.
Absolutely. A lot that we ask of you all from our climatology team here at K-State. And we've got a lot still to come and to develop in the coming months. But of course, we'll be leaning on you all for that information. So we can't thank you enough for always being great resources for us.
Oh, we're happy to do that. We're here to serve Kansas. That is our mission in our climate office.
Absolutely. And because you guys are so Kansas-centric, you do have resources available that are, ways that we can benefit from you all, but you can also benefit from us, too, in parts of the state, right? And one of those tools that I'm referencing here is CoCoRaHS. Yes,
CoCoRaHS is a nationwide citizen-based observer program. And we're all excited right now. March Madness, K-State's doing awesome right now. But there's a March Madness specific to CoCoRaHS, and it's this friendly competition that all the states have to try and get as many new reporters during the month of March that they can. Now, last year, we had 37 new observers who signed on to our project. So this year, we're at 38 already.
Wow.
And we're ranked 8th. We are in the Elite 8 of CoCoRaHS March Madness, which is very exciting. We hope K-State makes it to the Elite 8 as well, of course. But the most important thing about CoCoRaHS is that's the main thing that we look at to assess the drought. When we need to know, hey, how much precipitation was there in Cherokee County or in, let's say, Wichita County. It doesn't matter what county it is. We look at the entire state because that's the key to saying what is the current condition of the drought. And one of the problems we have is there are some parts of the state where we don't have any observers. And I'm going to pick on Cherokee County because that is one of our 5 counties in the state where we currently don't have any active observers. So when it comes to making recommendations for the U.S. Drought Monitor, it's impossible to make a recommendation without any data.
Absolutely. And that data allows you to be even more specific with some of the locations because, like you said, it's local individuals referencing, what's going on in their own backyard in these situations.
That's true. You can also measure at your place of business if that's more convenient for you. The most important thing that I want to stress is this is a free project. We're the only state in the nation that provides the rain gauges for this project free of charge.
Wow.
And the reason we do that is very simple. Agriculture is critical to the lifeblood of this state, and we need that information because we all look at that drought map. Obviously, it's kind of the thing that draws us together, if you will, this commiseration that you're in D4, this joy that you're drought-free. We want to make that map as accurate as possible. And we do hear from folks that say, well, your map doesn't reflect what's going on at my yard or on my farm. And my first response is, well, have you been telling us about what's going on at your farm? Have you told us about the precipitation you're getting? And the end response is always, well, no, I'm not. I say, well, you could be making a huge difference. In these counties where we have only 1 or 2 observers, there's a whole large part of a county potentially that we don't know what's going on. And it's why it's so critical to get new observers. We want to fill in all of those gaps. So, as I say, we have 5 counties right now, no observers. We have Cherokee, we have Chase, Atchison, Haskell, and one that I have totally forgotten, and I should know because I've been stressing about trying to find people in this county. I can see the map in my head, but we have a number of counties with only 1 observer. And I say southeast Kansas is our problem area. So if you are listening to us, and let's say you are in Chanute or Parsons, Pittsburgh, Columbus, that area. In addition, further out, Iola, Fort Scott. I'm like, this is, shout outs to Southeast Kansas. We need your help. Those are the areas we have so little information to go off of. And you really do make a difference. I like to say, we supply the gauges, you supply the data, and together we serve Kansas.
Absolutely. And it's an easy sign-up process, right, from what I understand?
Absolutely. Let me give you the URL for the website. CoCoRaHS is an acronym. It's CoCoRaHS.org. If you visit that webpage, it will tell you about the project. There's a link to join there, and when you join, I get an email, comes to my inbox here at K-State, and we send you out a rain gauge the next day. It's as simple as that.
Wonderful. Well, Matt, hopefully this inspires a few people to get involved and, takes our Kansas CoCoRaHS program from the Elite 8 maybe to the Final 4 in this situation.
Oh, that would be great. It's a fun competition, but we all realize the significance and the importance of what we do. And I want to mention that reporting the data is also really simple. You go to the website, and there's also an app. Enter in your data every day. It's very quick. And again, it's so important to us. So please help us and join CoCoRaHS.
Absolutely. A great resource for sure. But also you are a great resource, Matt. So thanks so much for joining us today for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Absolutely. Once again, everyone, that was our K-State Assistant State Climatologist, Matt Sittel, joining us for a conversation on winter conditions that we saw this past year and maybe what we can expect in spring and summer months to come. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we're continuing today's show with our friends from the Beef Cattle Institute. We're joined now by Brad White, Brian Lubbers, and Bob Larson.
Brian, tell me, what is hardware disease?
So hardware disease, you think about the ruminant digestive tract, and cattle are not particularly picky about grazing. And so oftentimes they'll ingest, we use the medical term foreign body, but basically a non-feed stuff item, right?
Nuts, bolts, wires, anything that's not bolted down.
Anything, And their digestive tract sits just on the other side of their diaphragm from their chest cavity. And so they ingest these nuts, bolts, wires, whatever, pieces of metal. They'll swallow it. It gets into one of their stomach compartments, and then it can actually move out and move into their chest. And obviously, when it does that, it pulls the bacteria that are in the digestive tract out into other places. And cattle are really good at making abscesses, so trying to wall off infections. And so they can, sometimes it'll be just a small abscess there that they wall off, and you might see some decreased performance and stuff, but they'll move forward. If that wire moves in the right direction and far enough, they actually go into the sac surrounding their heart, and they get an infection there, and those cattle don't typically do well. So it's kind of this ingesting things that they shouldn't be eating, and then those go somewhere they shouldn't outside the digestive tract.
That's actually how they explore, is putting stuff in their mouth and potentially eating it, and they will do that. And the easiest scenario to think of is if you have a wire and it goes into a compartment of the stomach, the reticulum, where it's going to fall out. And that compartment of the stomach is relatively small, smaller than a volleyball or ish. And then when it contracts, if it contracts, that wire basically pokes through the edge of the stomach, or any foreign body can do this. So, Bob, what might I see if I see a cow and I say, well, she might have hardware? Because I can't see any of the stuff that Brian talked about.
Yeah. And there's a couple of different signs that we might see. One is a really technical, specific veterinary term called ain't doing right. And it can be just kind of, this cow, I don't know why she's losing weight. She doesn't seem to be, doing well.
Doesn't have a fever, doesn't seem to be an infection.
Right. But it's not real clear, but she's really kind of dropping back. And those are hard to diagnose because it could be anything or everything. But that is one of the signs. That classic textbook, which Cows don't always read the textbook. In fact, they oftentimes don't. But if it does affect the heart, some of the things they talk about that you will see occasionally is they kind of stand with their elbows out. Think about a painful chest. Difficult, so it's painful to breathe. They've got possibly some heart issues so that they get edema under their chin because their heart's not working well. So those would be kind of end stage. If you see those types of things, this is probably not going to turn out very well, and pretty soon not going to turn out very well.
Whatever the cause.
Right.
Whether it's hardware or not, because you can have, and you'll see some of those same signs if you did have cattle that are having a heart insufficiency for any reason.
Yeah.
But hardware is one of the first things that we'd think about.
Exactly. So that's what you'd look at. Then what you do about it, so sometimes we will actually open them up, reach your arm down into the stomach and try to pull it out. That actually works not very often, but it's something you can try. Dairy cattle, we commonly put a magnet in their rumen or down their throat so that it sits in that reticulum. And the thought there is that any pieces of metal will stick to the magnet and be less likely to migrate through. And that is something one can do. The other main thing that we do is our feed suppliers have magnets in the milling process to try to pull out, because these pieces of wire can come from the cornfield, from the hayfield. They can come from anywhere. And so the feed producers have magnets, and if you're producing your own feed, that's something to think about. And also,
sometimes feed trucks.
Yeah,
feed trucks they'll have a magnet on there to try to pull stuff out, and you do have to. Having a magnet is not the whole solution. You actually have to check the magnet and clean it off.
Pull it off. And so those are some of the things you do. And commonly we don't put magnets just in every beef cow, but if I'm in a herd that's had a couple of these issues, we might start putting some magnets in cows because we know they're getting exposed somewhere.
Well, and stuff in the pasture, right? So you have stuff in the pasture that they'll eat or whatever, and that is what they're doing, is exploring. And as Brian talked about, once it pokes through, the problem is actually no longer the wire. It's that bacteria that sets up the infection, and infections in the chest or in the abdomen are rarely good, right? And cows are great at producing inflammatory tissue.
You're a veterinarian, aren't you?
You could tell. Yeah,
yes,
we had that.
We
had that whole chapter. What stuff that's rarely good?
Yeah,
and this was right in the middle of that chapter.
Yeah. Like you said, the wire itself isn't typically, or the screw or bolt or nail or whatever it is. It's the secondary things that happen after that penetrates through the stomach. So yeah, and Bob went straight to treatment. He kind of skipped over diagnosis. This is one typically they don't have like a classic sign that we'd say, hey, if they look like this is what it is. Whenever you have one of those cows that ain't doing right, it's probably worth having your veterinarian just check it out. And as Bob said, this is pretty high on the list usually. So be one of the first things I would look for.
Absolutely. So that's a good thing to keep an eye out, and much better to prevent. So we try to prevent those things in the feedstuffs, the most likely area. There could be other places. And if you have one that's not doing right, have your veterinarian come check them out. So good discussions today, guys. Appreciate you joining us. As always, if you have questions, topics, things you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can send us an email at bci@ksu.edu.
Once again, those were our friends from the Beef Cattle Institute, Brad White, Brian Lubbers, and Bob Larson on hardware disease. We're continuing now with a Kansas profile from Ron Wilson with the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. An 8-foot-tall tomato plant? It sounds like a gardener's dream, but one innovative young rural Kansas couple is making it become reality using hydroponics. It's today's Kansas Profile. Samuel and Marianne Beachy are the founders and owners of Beachy's Flowers and Produce. They were living in Kentucky and then moved to Kansas so as to be closer to Marianne's parents in Linden. Samuel was operating a locker plant in Osage City until he sold that business. The Beachy's church was looking to expand in the Wamego and Manhattan area, and Samuel wanted to pursue a new enterprise there. I've always been intrigued with growing things, Samuel said. I love to grow things in the garden. As he and Marianne considered a move, they thought about the type of produce operation which could work best in northeast Kansas and decided to try an indoor hydroponic system. He did a lot of studying, Marianne said. As the Beachys prepared to relocate, they told the realtor they were looking for a location that was served by natural gas and was next to a major highway. The realtor identified just one location. It was the first place the Beachys looked at, and they bought it. This was a godsend, Samuel said. The location was next to Highway 24, east of Manhattan. It already had a house with a large shop. The Beachy's built a state-of-the-art polycarbonate truss-style greenhouse which connected to the shop. It is fully hydroponic, so the plants are raised in recycled water with the precise nutrients needed. Beachy's Flowers and Produce opened on November 30, 2022. For now, the flowers are coming from Council Grove, but the produce is homegrown and booming. The Beachy's produce tomatoes, lettuce, broccoli, peppers, cauliflower, spring onions, kale, spinach, cilantro, and cucumbers. In the future, they plan to also grow carrots, beets, potatoes, and strawberries. The climate-controlled greenhouse enables produce to be grown year-round. My goal is to provide a place where people can buy produce at the same place that it is grown, Samuel said. That would definitely seem to shorten the supply chain. I want to raise enough that you can make a good salad with what we produce, he said. The production process is highly scientific, with probes used to control pH and nutrient levels. No soil is needed. Water is constantly recirculated. A retractable ceiling curtain helps control the climate naturally. We can open the curtain to let the sun in and close it when we want to hold in the warmth, Samuel said. Lettuce seedlings, for example, are started under grow lights. Then the rooted seedlings in peat pellets are placed in rows of watertight PVC trays through which the water and nutrients are pumped and recirculated. The trays are placed on waist-high metal frames and with time moved farther apart to make room for the plants to grow. We have to plan ahead, Samuel said. We plant 200 seeds per week of lettuce and harvest in 2 months, he said. The Beachy's butterhead lettuce with just a hint of sweetness is a variety that is proven especially popular. For tomatoes, the truss ceiling makes it possible to use string to hold up the tops of the plants, which enables them to grow to their full potential. With proper trimming and treatment, these plants can grow 8 feet tall and produce extraordinary tomatoes. Our goal is 3/4-pound tomatoes, Samuel said. Their produce is available for sale at grocery stores in Wamego, Westmoreland, and Holton, at Manhattan Farmers Market, and direct from the greenhouse. I would like to grow the business so that people can come right here for their produce, Samuel said. Their location is along Highway 24, northwest of the rural community of St. George, population 1,054 people. Now that's rural. For more information, contact Beachy's Flowers and Produce at 785-219-1759. 8-foot-tall tomato plants, it sounds like a gardener's dream, and they're growing at Beachy's Flowers and Produce. We commend Samuel and Marianne Beachy for making a difference with fantastic produce and innovative production practices. Seeing their success makes me feel 10 feet tall. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
Once again, that was Ron Wilson with the Kansas Profile from the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development here at K-State. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. If you have a cool season lawn such as tall fescue or Kentucky bluegrass, early spring is a good time to start caring for the lawn. K-State horticulturist Ward Upham says that includes an initial mowing, possibly fertilizing, watering, and maybe some weed control. Ward, as we finally enter spring, it's time to start thinking about some of that lawn work as well. Nothing if you've got warm season lawns at this point.
That's right. So if you have Bermuda, zoysia, or buffalo grass, those are our warm season grasses. No need to do anything about them yet.
The cool season lawns, though, we can start doing some work there.
That's right. Tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass are 2 cool season lawns, and therefore they're the ones that we're going to be talking about.
And for those cool season lawns, the first thing to really think about is mowing.
That's right. And so usually what you want to do is that first mowing, you're going to want to mow low. And that's to get rid of all that dead grass on top. So when the new grass comes up, it's not mixed in with the dead. Just makes it look a lot better. But once you've done that first mowing, then bring it up to your normal height. The reason for that is the amount of top growth, or the height of top growth, is related to the depth of the roots. So if you mow low, you're going to have a shallow root system. Mow at the recommended height, you're going to have a much deeper root system. And that's important to have that root system once we get into summer weather.
And we're trying to clear things out, so do we need to do some bagging or some mulching? Does it make any difference?
It really doesn't make any difference as long as you're not leaving windrows. If you're leaving windrows, you need to get rid of that or it's going to shade the grass. And the height is also going to be important for that normal mowing height. Tall fescue, you're talking 3 to 3.5 inches. Kentucky bluegrass is a finer bladed grass, and it'll be a little bit lower. 2 to 2.5 inches is the normal recommended height. So that first mowing height, you'll be a little bit lower than that.
And then as we move forward, we just kind of want to keep that 1/3 rule?
That's right. So never take over more than 1/3 of that grass blade at one time. Now, if you get a lot of rain, that may be difficult to do. You may have to bring it down in stages if it has to get too tall just because of the weather.
Also, time to do some fertilizing?
Yeah, it depends. So if you fertilized in November, you don't have to do any fertilizing now. You're just going to wait till May. If you didn't, and that lawn looks a little bit yellow or not as green as you would like, then a light fertilization would be in order. Now, if you're going to water during the summer, keep it green during the summer, then another fertilization in May would be recommended. Use a slow-release fertilizer, or what they usually call a summer fertilizer for lawns, and that will release that nitrogen slowly so that the grass looks good all the way through the summer.
I know sometimes they have a lot of numbers on the bags. Is it maybe easier just to look for, as you mentioned, summer fertilizer? That's
right. It's normally going to be that first number, which is the percent of nitrogen that'll be the highest percent. So like a 2733, 2644, something like that will normally be what you have. It's the one that's in September that you may have a more balanced fertilizer where you have more phosphorus and potassium. Those are the second and third numbers on that bag.
And then just follow the instructions for spreading that out?
That's right. What you're putting on is about a pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. But if you follow the directions on the bag, that's what you'll put down.
You mentioned rainfall, but what about just normal watering?
Normal watering be good. It's a good idea to water that in so that it takes effect. You only need like a 1/4 inch of water. You don't need much. So you need to get that prill dissolved and into the soil.
And in terms of weed control, anything to think about there yet?
The best weed control is a good thick lawn. However, often we're going to need a weed preventer, or crabgrass preventer as they're called. And what that does is kill that crabgrass weed seed as it germinates. And so that is usually put down maybe April 1st in the southern part of Kansas, April 15th for the rest of the state. You can put it on earlier, but if you wait too long, you already have some of that crabgrass germinating, and then it's going to be too late for that. That needs to be watered in order to activate it. So again, 1/4 inch of water is all you're going to need.
And then for the broadleaf weeds, we might see some of those as well.
Yeah, again, if you sprayed in November, you may not have much of a problem with those. But if you have dandelions or chickweed or henbit, then a broadleaf weed control would be called for. Just choose a day that's over 50 degrees. Dandelions usually are easier to control than the chickweed or henbit. Don't be surprised if the chickweed and henbit come back. They're better controlled in the fall. Early November, for example, on a day that's 50 degrees or over.
That's K-State horticulturist Ward Upham with information on early spring lawn care. For additional information, contact the local extension office or do an online search for K-State Spring Lawn Calendar. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.